I'm going to just go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Katie Danino, and I am a social worker in the Newton Public Schools. And Newton is very committed to supporting our families' resilience, whether it's during this challenging time or any other challenging time. And so tonight, in conjunction with the Resilience Project at Newton-Wellesley, we are offering this webinar. And I'm going to just go ahead and introduce our presenters. Tonight we have Juliana Chen and Ty Katzenstein, who are co-directors of the Resilience Project's Parents and Caregivers Program, which is based out of Newton-Wellesley Hospital. Juliana is a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Newton-Wellesley and also at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's also a part-time clinical instructor at Harvard Medical School. She serves as Associate Director of the MGH Center for Cross-Cultural Student Emotional Awareness, which supports the emotional and mental health needs of culturally diverse students, especially Asian and Asian American students. Ty is a clinical psychologist and Director of Parent Guidance in the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Newton-Wellesley. Both Juliana and Ty facilitate parent skills groups and regularly give talks on parenting, fostering resilience, and supporting the emotional wellness of parents and families. So we are in great hands tonight for this program. And without further ado, I'm just going to hand it right over to Juliana and Ty, who will get us started and share how we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Katie, thank you so much. We are very happy to be here and also really appreciate, we know how much it takes to sort of carve out an extra hour in a parent's life. So we're happy to have you here. And as Katie was saying, the plan for tonight will be part presentation and part Q&A. And of course, under quote unquote pre-COVID circumstances, we would have been in a real room together. And we're, as you'll see, our presentation style is somewhat informal. So please feel free to submit any questions in the chat window. And, we love back and forth. So if you feel like, any way of communicating with us is fine. And we lean to the more informal style. Juliana, do you want to add anything?
No, just add on that thank you, Katie, and we're so happy to be here to talk with all of you. Some of you may have joined us for other past events. And as Ty said, want to reiterate the intention here. To the extent possible, we want this to be personal and informal, as anonymous as Zoom webinars often are, but we're going to pretend that we're in the room together. And we are really so happy to see you. And as Ty said, please don't hesitate to ask any questions at any point in time. But we'll just jump in, and our plan is to talk for maybe the first, 2/3 or so, but we can take questions throughout, and then we'll definitely have some time at the end. So we'll go from there.
Great. So we wanted to just start by acknowledging what you already know as parents, which is that parents and kids and teens have been running an emotional and logistical marathon for the past 2 years. Most of the parents we speak with in our clinic and in the community are tired and depleted. It sort of feels like mile 19 at a marathon, and like the fueling tank is out of water and out of power bars. With the decrease of Omicron, there's been some relief for families. We are again facing an unknown with the emergence of the B2 variant. For families where there's a medical vulnerability, this is a very difficult time. Even for families without medical complexities, a sense of relief is also mixed with uncertainty. Different from March 2020, when generally speaking, we were all on the same page about hunkering down, there is now a wider distribution of choices that families are making about things like sports and travel, play dates. So parents are in the position of needing to constantly make these risk calculations on their own within a context of uncertainty, while also trying to make the best decisions they can make about the physical and emotional well-being of their families. While many kids and teens have come through the pandemic okay, others have been struggling with a variety of mental health concerns. As you may have heard, the US Surgeon General issued an advisory on the youth mental health crisis, which has been further exacerbated by the COVID crisis. So we know that many parents are dealing with concerns and worries about their family's mental health. So I guess all this to really say clearly that we want parents to know If you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling inadequate, burnt out, lost, or alone, it makes a lot of sense, and that you are not alone. Lots of parents are feeling this.
As Ty just talked about, even as some things have been, we know, feeling better and maybe a little bit more back to normal, the reality is we all have been living with chronic uncertainty, chronic recurrent stress on top of the typical stressors of general life and parenting. So this has been pretty continuous for most families that we know over the last 2 years. And this can, perhaps stating the obvious, but can have very real and at times significant impacts on our mood, our behavior, our daily functioning as individuals and as parents. So this is to underscore a point that Ty has already made, but just want to say to all of you, we want to validate whatever it is each of you may be feeling or experiencing, whatever stress or overwhelm yesterday, today, or tomorrow in the near or far future, that just to validate it. And it does make sense. Our mood and behavior are both impacted even when we're not consciously aware that we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. So this is like that invisible weight that you each have probably been carrying day in and day out. And parenting can often be like this. Parenting under a pandemic is certainly like this. And so this applies to, hopefully this doesn't raise people's stress level, but this applies to even with mild or moderate stress and uncertainty and having to make repeated decisions and pivot over and over again. That itself is also a stress. And so stress has real impacts, which I know we all know, but it bears stating here, and both the severity and duration of that stress really make a difference. So this is why, and you'll hear us say this a few times today, we really always want to encourage parents to be paying attention, not pushing aside what doesn't feel good, not pushing aside the stress, and really in whatever small ways you each can to prioritize yourselves and devoting, even if it's the littlest of time, to taking care of yourself to counter the impacts of that chronic stress and chronic uncertainty of life, and the chronic stress and uncertainty of parenting. So resilience. Many of you have heard us share this message before. And while it is true that some might be more naturally oriented to resiliency, just temperamentally, right, come out of the womb this way, resilience is actually something that all of us, kids, teens, and grown-ups, have the capacity for. So it's like a muscle. We'll often tell kids and parents this. Resilience is like a muscle that can be strengthened through adversity, both big and small. And resilience is something that we can help build in ourselves as parents, as individuals, and it's something we can support in our kids and during difficult times, and also in the general day-to-day. And these last 2 years, as you all know, have been and remain one tremendous opportunity, for better and worse, to build that muscle. So today, our plan is to talk about supporting resilience building in our kids and ourselves. There are infinite ways we can do this. We're focusing on just a few. And as we talk about strategies for strengthening our own resilience, especially for those of you who maybe have a harder time prioritizing yourselves, and there are probably many of you, know that while you are taking care of yourself, and if even in just those little few minutes or small moments of a day, you are simultaneously modeling and supporting resilience building in your family and kids too. So there are multiple good reasons to do this. Hi, you're muted still.
Sorry about that. When we talk with parents, we're always talking about self-care. And this is one of those areas where it often feels, it sounds so easy, and we know that it's not. And the challenge is, of course, under the best of circumstances, parent self-care is difficult. And then you add any degree of stress. If a kid who's struggling with mental health or with certain skill challenges, it becomes that much harder. And we totally understand and get that. And the challenge is it becomes that much more important. So, I think that's kind of the dilemma. So we really try to talk and think about the way in which self-care is really about prioritizing in whatever way works for you as a parent, for whatever amount of time you have, any action that gives us the feeling that we're filling up the tank a little bit. So oftentimes, this is not a new message. Parents know that they should be doing self-care. So often we hear things, phrases like should or have to. And what we want to try to do is shift that feeling to one of like want to or get to. So sometimes trying to find a hook in terms of like the meaning that self-care may have for you is an important tool in making that shift from should to get to happen. And as we talk about self-care, we hear lots of misconceptions. We often hear parents talking about like they don't have the time, it requires so much time, which it does. And we really want to put out there the idea that self-care can happen in very small bites throughout the day. It can happen in 30 seconds, 1 minute, 1 minute deep breathing, a 5-minute cup of tea. All of that counts as self-care. We just want to be able to try to fold it in to the day, and that's hard. So we often talk with parents about when we're thinking about self-care, it's something we're thinking about doing just one step better than nothing. That is totally legitimate and valid and significant and important when it comes to self-care. So just one step better than nothing. Another common misconception is that there's something about self-care that feels selfish. And again, we try to talk with parents about how that really isn't, like it couldn't be further from the truth that we can't give our kids the things they need when we're running on empty. Parenting takes a tremendous amount of psychological energy. And again, when our kids are struggling with anything, it's double. We have to sort of be superhuman in our reserves. So we really want those tanks to be full. So we often talk about how a really fundamental part of kid resilience is actually parent resilience. And so the wonderful thing about taking care of yourself is you are also taking care of your kid. One of our colleagues often says self-care is childcare, and we really believe that. So again, I hope you leave with like one big bullet here, which is that self-care is necessary. It's not a luxury. You deserve it. Your kids deserve it. And if at all possible, we want you to think about how to prioritize it, even in tiny ways, especially in tiny ways for each and every one of you.
Sorry, I'm having some technical challenges with my computer, but bear with me, you guys. You guys can hear me now? Okay, thank you. You're going to hear us keep talking about self-care, and we're going to talk about some parenting things too, but just because it really is so fundamental, and from all the parents that we've been working with, we know how overwhelmed and burnt out many of you are. So that's why we want to spend a little time on this. So in terms of self-care, what are some of the first steps? We know you know this, but we also know how incredibly hard it is. So we want to spend a few minutes. So first, what you know, right, and still so hard to do, as Ty just said, but is really prioritizing the very, very basics, the things that we know are good for us: regular sleep, healthy eating, moving our bodies in some whatever one step more than nothing way. Also connecting with activities that help you to relax, to recharge, to decompress, whatever that may be. Getting outside for a walk, even around the block. Is it listening to part of a podcast or a song, taking a bath, reading a book? Whatever it is, these things really do matter. We know for many, the basics of self-care may feel like a luxury. So if you can, in whatever ways you can, please don't push this aside. During stressful times, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed and lost. But it's important to remember that you all know more than you may think that you know, or it feels like you know. So especially if feeling in doubt, think back to earlier in the pandemic, perhaps, and all you had to navigate, and the way you had to make 1,000,001 decisions and had to pivot and then pivot again and to make things work. And you did do that. Or think back to other challenging times in your life or your family's life, and remember what you know, right? What worked and what didn't work. How did things look for a particular kid in your family? What did your particular kid need? And a lot of that likely still holds true for any new experiences or stressors that you're facing now or will face. Holding on to this knowledge can sometimes help us to reorient and keep faith in ourselves, and that's so critical. Another critical part of self-care for parents is noticing the internal messages and expectations we have for ourselves. And are they things like, it is my job to make everyone in my family happy and to have all the answers, or it's my job to erase every disappointment, to replace every loss, or make up for every sacrifice my kids have, made over these last 2 years. Except these kinds of internal messages or whatever messages you may have generally are not true, right? They're distortion or an exaggeration. As parents, we all do what we can, of course. But as parents, your job is also not necessarily to have all the answers, even though I know we often want to have them for our kids, but it's actually not your job to have all the answers. And sometimes, more than anything else, a parent's job is to bear the uncertainty, disappointment, the ups and downs alongside our kids and teens. And that's a really, really, really powerful parenting intervention. And the goal is for us, this is about scaffolding ourselves, but also our kids, is to help our kids learn to be able to face the hard stuff and to ride through it and not necessarily to fix it or to get over it, if that makes sense. So maybe here, take a moment quietly for yourself, take a moment and notice your own internal messages and your own internal expectations that you might be carrying sometimes or most of the time. And can you notice for a moment what you're telling yourself? And I guarantee you, each of you are telling yourself something, whether you realize it or not. And oftentimes those internal messages tend to be more critical. So are you telling yourself, perhaps, I'm a horrible parent because I'm impatient, I lost my temper, I don't like my kids, I'm letting my kids have way too much screen time or whatever it is. And then think about the messages and expectations you have when you are feeling especially ineffective, especially tired, especially incompetent as a parent. And do those internal messages and expectations get even louder and more critical? And our guess is probably yes. This is universal. So this is nothing to feel bad or ashamed about, but just to pay attention to it. For those of you who might especially be struggling with harsh inner critics, please really try this now. So, right, so you have that message, hopefully you've identified. Are you able to zoom out in some way? Can you shift or reframe the message and expectation that you have in some way to something that is more kind or more realistic? Like these are difficult times for everyone, or for right now, I'm doing the best that I can. We'll figure out a screen time plan, when things are a little bit calmer or more things are settled, or when I have more energy, whatever it is, it's okay. And it's going to be hard to hold on to that gentler message. We also know, but you just revisit it and you just revisit it and you just revisit it when you can. And to try to just notice when you're being hard on yourself.
So let's talk a little bit more about connecting with others. Sorry. Let's talk a little bit more about connecting with others, because that is a huge source of resilience and self-care. And again, this is another area where we know people know this, we know parents know this, and it's really hard. And when your kid is struggling, it's even harder. So we want parents to just think about, even in small ways, who does it feel possible to connect to? Is it loved ones? Is it family? Is it neighbors? Is it other parents who are going through similar struggles? To really prioritize connections with those people is an important to do. And we know it can feel really hard to reach out when we're struggling. It can feel hard to reach out when we're worried. And yet the benefits of reaching out are really well documented in terms of both physical and mental health benefits. And we know also that when you reach out and you're struggling, it's a position of vulnerability. It doesn't come easily to everybody. And so we just encourage parents, if it feels safe enough, to try to take that risk to be vulnerable and share with somebody with whom it makes sense to share how you're actually feeling, since nobody is alone in the pandemic. Nobody is alone when their kids are struggling with mental health or other issues. So I think, again, important to remember that we're not alone as parents. So just as we're encouraging parents not to worry alone and to listen and to take care of yourselves, we want the same for our kids. And one of the most fundamental ways that parents can support their kids is by making things talk aboutable and by really prioritizing listening at home. And this can be, as Juliana mentioned, hard to do, especially during times of higher stress, because we are master problem solvers as parents. We want to fix things. And again, it may sound obvious, but making things talk aboutable and really listening to our kids and teens is actually a very hard thing to do. So So we want channels of communication to be as open as they can be. And we know, that looks very different for kids at different developmental stages. But the reason why we want this, we want the channels of communication to be as open as they can be, is that it's protective for kids. It gives them a sense, it helps them to make sense of difficult feelings and difficult experiences. It gives them a sense of safety. And it lets them know that we're here. And, we run a Raising Resilient Teen workshop for parents. And oftentimes, and we understand this, parents say, like, it doesn't even seem to matter. Or, I have a kid who isn't a talker. And it's just very clear that even under those circumstances, it's a very powerful and stabilizing force for them to have an experience of a parent who is present and willing and trying to understand. As our hero Fred Rogers said, what is mentionable becomes manageable. So having things be talk aboutable at home, whatever they may be, automatically makes things less scary, even when we're dealing with adversity and uncertainty. One of the frameworks that Juliana and I like to talk about with parents is called the 4 C's. It's a framework for communication. And the 4 C's that we talk about are calm, curious, compassionate, and concerned. And basically, it's a sort of a shorthand anchor to try to generate sort of effective communication. And it's particularly helpful when emotions and stress are running high. And the overarching goal is to really try to follow those 4 C's in that order. So first, we want to start by being calm. And again, this is something we all know in theory. And of course, it's something that is very hard to do and that we often don't do. But the reason we want to try to do it is because strong emotion and clear thinking are inversely related. So when all of us, not just kids, but when all of us are emotional or stressed, we know that our problem-solving skills, our thinking skills, clear thinking skills fly out the window. So especially when things are challenging, we want to notice where is our own stress level, and we want to try as much as we can to center ourselves before engaging. And if we're not centered, then wise choice is to not engage in the conversation. That's actually a very important thing to be able to do. So the second C of the 4 C's is curious. So only if we're calm, then we can move to sort of being curious. And this is where we as parents ask our teens and kids about their experiences and perspectives. And if this step had a bumper sticker, it would be talk less and listen more. This step, or this C, really hinges on our willingness to listen to them and not to ourselves. We want to be curious about what's happening, how they see a problem, what their perspective is, and really approach them with an open heart and an open mind, again, to sort of really understand how they're viewing a situation, what they're going through. And as we listen, we want to do it compassionately, which is that 3rd C. And this means actively extending compassion to whatever it is they're sharing or not sharing. And even if we don't fully get it, or even if we've heard the thing they're saying 10 times before, to really bring that quality of open-heartedness to the interaction. We want to really connect up with the perspective that just like us, they're doing the best they can under difficult circumstances. And when we approach kids and teens from that space, it really does, there is something that it does to the quality of the interaction that's really very positive. Okay, so after we've been through calm, curious, and compassionate, then we go to concern. And this is where, as parents, we ask ourselves what our perspective is, and then we share it with our kids and teens. And what we like to point out to parents is that notice it's the last of the 4 C's, which is important, again, because typically parents, because they're so good at problem solving and want to solve problems, jump in with this step first. They jump in right with their concerns. And the sort of downside to that is it often shuts kids and teens down. So we really want to hear what our kids are thinking and feeling. And we want to help, and sort of listening really closely and really carefully helps build a sense of trust and a sense of safety that really is fundamental to the notion of building resilience. So listening is a powerful tool in resilience building.
I want to take a highlighter and just like highlight this part. Okay, you guys. So Ty mentioned earlier that there are a few takeaways. Like one, we really want to underscore the importance of taking care of yourself. But another one is these 4 C's. And we promise you, because we've worked with so many parents, just like remember these 4 C's and put them in your back pocket. Because as Ty said, most every parent we know goes right to the concern. It's just automatic. And so chances are, and not faulting you, but many of you probably do this too. And so how many of your kids or teens have said to you, you're not listening, or they shut down, or you're not getting the response that you want to get from them? And try and think for yourself right now, how often, how calm are you? How do the conversations begin? Are you going right to the concern? And can you slow it down a little bit and go through the first 3 C's that Ty just talked about? So that's another thing just to put in your pocket. So talking and listening and the 4 C's of communication. What can parents do with all the also big feelings? Because we're not like just, communicating about the day to day. But what do you do with the sometimes extra big feelings that kids and we are having, but especially with this extra uncertainty, the frustrations, the disappointments our kids have been facing, and to be honest, will likely continue to face, right? And we know sometimes when the feelings get big, whether you have preschoolers, elementary, high schoolers, the feelings can get pretty huge sometimes. So as Ty said, making room for those feelings, as with all parenting, depends a lot on the kid. And so it can be a little bit hard. But we really want to emphasize the making room for feelings and the listening. For kids and teens that are big talkers, a parent's job is ideally to make room for it, for all they're wanting to share. And as Ty said, to listen. This is one of the best, most powerful parenting interventions you can have, is to listen. We want to let them know that we've heard them. We want to validate their feelings. That's the curious and compassionate that I talked about. So for example, like, I totally understand why you're feeling sad or upset or angry about not being able to do X, Y, or Z, see your friends, have that sleepover. Your friends matter so much to you. And if we weren't dealing with COVID or this particular family circumstance or whatever it be, you'd be seeing them a lot more. You're not trying to change the situation. You're just kind of acknowledging it and validating what your kid might be sharing with you. Other kids or teens might be quieter. They may have a harder time identifying or expressing their feelings. Younger kids especially may need some help knowing what they feel. And I want to emphasize that too. Like, knowing a feeling is a skill that kids have to learn, and then being able to put it into words is yet another skill that they have to learn. And some teenagers and grown-ups struggle with this too. So for these kinds of kids or teens, a parent's job is to help them recognize and name the mad, sad, worried, frustrated feelings, whatever they may be. For kids and teens who maybe do know what they're feeling, but they aren't big talkers, or maybe there's some, parent-child relationship strain, which happens a lot. And so there's a lot of shutdown or oppositionality that can happen. We want to ask gentle questions. And our job is to be patient, and really using the 4 C's that just talked about can sometimes do a little relationship repair, or sometimes help our kid or teen open up just a little bit, and maybe being a little curious about your child's feelings and experiences first, not making an assumption, but being curious. I'd like to know what's going on for you, see if I could help. Could I float 3 guesses and you let me know which ones are on target? And again, this, depends on the kid. Different interventions work for different kids. Remembering too, that feelings often get expressed through behavior. So a kid or a teen who is anxious or stressed or disappointed or feeling left out, just like a grown-up, right, is more likely to act out or regress or shut down. So we know trying to have empathy for hard to receive behaviors can be a challenge, but it is also so important to try to do so while trying to make the feelings underneath those behaviors talk aboutable. So being able to identify feelings, as I mentioned, being able to talk about feelings, as I mentioned, but also being able to manage difficult feelings is a critical life skill, a critical part of self-care, a critical part of every relationship, and a critical part of resilience, as I mentioned. So with especially challenging feelings, reactions, or behaviors, it can be helpful for parents to connect with this idea: my child isn't giving me a hard time. My child is having a hard time. Can you hear that for a second? My child isn't giving me a hard time. My child is having a hard time. Think back to when they were infants or toddlers. It's more easy generally for parents to connect with the idea when our kids are young, and we sometimes forget this as they grow, but the same principle applies. And remembering that little mantra like this can sometimes help decrease tensions or conflict at home if there is high tension there. It can sometimes help parents get into a more helpful headspace when trying to connect or talk with a kid or teen. And then, of course, by making room to talk about the uncertainty or disappointment, no matter a child's age, know that you are strengthening the parent-child relationship. You are teaching both kids and teens that they can learn to feel, manage, and move through painful feelings in difficult times. And this is a critical dimension of resilience that our kids and teens can have with them then forever, right? And they can get them through the now because we're still in it, but it can also like be a muscle, that resilience muscle we talked about earlier, that they can then build and strengthen to help them better manage disappointments and hard times in the future. So that's kind of supporting our kids and their difficult feelings. What about when we have big moments for ourselves that we're feeling overwhelmed by bigger, more difficult feelings? So a lot of people don't realize, so for those of you who are tending more towards anxiety or worry, this is a common thing we're hearing from parents. A lot of people don't realize that anxiety tends to live in the future and depression and negative thinking tend to live in the past. And so to help hold on to a more positive, balanced view, we really want to encourage you to notice when your brain is veering toward the worry or negative thinking potholes. You can also do this for your kids too. Do you have a kid whose brain may veer towards the worry or negative thinking potholes? Or if your brain gets stuck on what if thinking or should have or shouldn't have kind of thinking, it can be helpful to try to bring your mind back to the present moment. And this can help quiet the worry and the negative thinking. And when people talk about mindfulness, I mean, this is why it's such a big buzzword now, but when people talk about mindfulness, this is partly what they're talking about. It can quiet the anxiety and quiet the worry. How do we do this? Any number of ways. It doesn't have to be a long exercise. Is it even just grounding into the sounds around you, noticing the way your chest rises and falls as you take a deep breath? Is it noticing, the warmth of the cozy blanket on your lap, or the warmth of the cup of tea or your morning coffee? When you can do that, if even for a few seconds or for a minute, though it may sound really small, in those moments, you're helping to calm your brain just a little bit, or you're helping to slow your brain down just a little bit if it's racing. And it can make it harder for your brain to spiral into the worry or to dwell on the past. And so when we're stressed, anxious, depressed, our perspective also often gets narrowed, like a tunnel vision. And so what this means is we can feel hopeless really fast. And one of the things that can be really helpful is a grounding statement. And this is something that would have to be that feels like true to you, and something that feels comforting in some way, or something that helps you to zoom out and see the big picture. Is it Omicron is feeling so hard, but I know that there's a beginning, middle, and an end to things, or we're going through a hard time right now, or I might be struggling, or my child might be struggling, but I know that this won't last forever. Again, it's an individual thing, but sometimes having a grounding statement can sometimes be helpful.
So sometimes also to help parents manage, bigger, more difficult feelings, we talk about sort of a 3-step process, which is the first step being to label the feelings or any feelings that parents are having that feel distressing or that feel upsetting or feel hard to hold. So after labeling, we then try to observe in the way that Juliana's talking about, sort of using sort of more of a mindfulness strategy to observe how are these feelings impacting our behavior? How are they impacting our thoughts and our body? And then finally, the third step is to really ask ourselves, what do I need now to what's the most effective thing I can now do? What do I now need? So let's take the first step a little bit more in depth, which is to label the feeling. So we can say to ourselves, I'm noticing anxiety, or I'm noticing panic. And the idea is that by labeling the feeling, we make those feelings feel less overwhelming, because it's like putting a doorstop between us and the feeling. So we're not as merged with the feeling. There's a little distance, and just that intervention alone can really help us be less reactive. So it's really the idea that you're observing the feelings. You're not the feeling itself. The second step is to, again, notice how that feeling is impacting our body or our mood or our thoughts or behavior. So we can notice literally, like, I'm feeling that anxiety in my jaw, I'm clenching my jaw, or I'm noticing that my thinking is veering towards the more catastrophic side of things. And again, when we do that, that process helps us contain the feeling, helps us hold the feeling, helps that feeling not escalate and escalate and escalate. And then the final step, as we talked about, is to really answer the question for yourself: what is it that I need right now? How would I, if my child or my spouse or partner or my neighbor were coming to me with this feeling, what would I do for them? How would I help them? And we know that all of this is easier said than done. We also know that practicing this and doing these steps really develop skills, like they develop our skills as parents, and they help us keep our head above water in really tough moments, and they absolutely build resilience, right? Because resilience isn't a thing that we have or not have. It's not something you're born with or something you don't have. It's something that you can practice and that you can build. Same with our kids. So we want to really practice building resilience over time.
Last but not least, then we'll take some questions in time, noticing there are a couple chats. So I'm sorry, you guys, if those have been there for a while. I think you and I are both having some technical difficulties today, but last but not least, persevering and holding on to hope. So how do you keep yourself going as a parent when everything is feeling so hard? And how do we help our kids and teens to remain hopeful after 2+ and still going challenging years and things still in many ways not feeling back to quote unquote normal? In the context of what feels like, at least to me, and I think to many others, an increasingly complicated world with so much ongoing trauma and loss, and with so much uncertainty still on the horizon. So we just want to say, and what I'm going to say now, a lot of these, I know we realize we package them and it may sound really trite and really simple, but we share these little mini lessons or strategies with you because we actually know them to be true and know them to be helpful. And if there's just one or two things that might hook with you, then take that hook. So we're going to just share a few last ones too. So as trite as it may sound, people talk about focusing on the positive for a reason, but please, if you can, to try to practice, focusing on this. It actually really does change what your brain pays attention to. Just like we can build a resilience muscle for those of us who have brains who tend towards the worry or the negative, practicing noticing some more positive things can really shift where our brain goes. So how do you do this? Again, with intentionality. And you do this by deliberately noticing and also expressing things that you are grateful for. And so this is why some of you may have heard about, very popular things like a gratitude journal. You can certainly keep a journal. It does not need to be lengthy. Even just each day identifying 3 to 5 things, very specific things that you're grateful for. It can be really small, like that you had the best cup of coffee this morning, or some nice thing that your kid maybe said to you at dinner that they liked what you cooked, or a friend sent you a nice text. They can be really, really small. Okay. The more specific, actually, the better. You can write it down in a journal. Maybe it's saying out loud, but this can help you to feel calmer and less hopeless and can change your orientation over time. This is something you can do on your own. It's something sometimes families do, like in the car over the family dinner, in whatever way it makes a difference. A lot of people, forgive me, sorry, Ty, my computer is freezing a little bit. We also want to talk with parents a lot about practicing gratitude. And this can be a lot of different things. But as I mentioned earlier, focusing on those things that really make a difference to you and being grateful for those things in your world that, am I okay, Ty? Okay, you sure? Are things off? I can tell by your face. Ty?
Yeah, no, I think you're okay.
Can you help orient me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. Practicing gratitude. And then when we're stressed in different ways of kind of zooming out. And the last piece, forgive me, is remembering self-compassion and good enough parenting. And so this is the time for real to lean into these ideas: compassion for our kids, self-compassion for ourselves, relaxing expectations, forgiving yourself for making mistakes, accepting that you won't have all the answers, whatever it is, and that is okay. And want to encourage all of you here to please remind yourself that you are doing the very, very best that you can, and that good enough truly is what we are striving for. So not perfection. There is no such thing as perfect parenting. And this idea, as again, as simplistic as it sounds, is a really powerful message for parents to hold on to, and a really incredibly powerful message to model and share with our children, so they aren't internalizing this idea of things having to be a certain way or to be perfect themselves. And for those of you who have a harder time accessing that self-compassion and good enough parenting, try to get whatever little bit you can. It's like if it's even just a small ember, that you are doing a good enough job. Even if that ember is small, it can still make a difference, and know that you are doing enough and that it is good enough.
So as we wrap up, we just want to highlight some big takeaways at a very sort of 50,000 foot view perspective. So remember that resilience is a skill that can be nurtured. It's not a trait. It can be practiced both by us and by our kids. If you feel stressed, it makes total sense. This has been a very hard and long marathon. So do pay attention to how stress is showing up for you, and I know this is, we know this is hard, to really try to prioritize the basics of self-care. Parent self-care matters. And to, in whatever way, small ways, 1% better than nothing, really try to implement that and fold that into your daily life. And, I think remembering that self-care is good childcare can be really helpful. We want to, again, encourage people to notice the internal messages and to really make a priority of being kinder and gentler. This has been a very, again, a lot of hard, critical messages that parents are internalizing and telling themselves because it has been so difficult. We want to make room for feelings and remember the real power of listening, both to ourselves and to our teens and children. And if it's helpful, please take the 4 C's, the calm, curious, compassionate, concerned framework, and use that. And last but not least, what Juliana was saying, I really want to underscore too, is that self-compassion and the idea of good enough parenting really have a place right now for parents.
So Ty, I'm so glad to bring those slides down. I'm sorry for those technical issues earlier. Do you want to just jump right into questions and
then do the ending? Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so some people submitted questions in advance, but we're happy to take questions now too if people want to put them in the chat. But do you want to just jump into the first one?
Sure.
So the transition to high school feels harder because half of the middle school years for these kids has occurred during the pandemic. Any tips specific to helping them navigate a much larger environment after so much remote learning with less normal social interaction? I think we've gotten different variations of this, of things feeling harder and how to manage. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess my first instinct is to really want to validate this concern and worry, because I think there, a lot has been missed and a lot of parents have similar worries. I mean, we're hearing about this worry in almost all the talks we're giving and in many of our conversations with parents. I guess if I'll be eager to hear what you think, Juliana, but a few things that I guess I would be keeping in mind is first to remember that that there have been, many kids have experienced losses around social interaction and because of the pandemic, so that the schools and teachers are very, very aware of this. And I guess it's important to remember also that even if we weren't in a pandemic, this shift from middle school to high school is truly it's a big transition. It's a big transition on its own anyway. And I think schools are set up to really try to help navigate that transition. And the other thing I'm often pointing out to parents is that even though there have been real losses and social interactions decrease in frequency or happen in very different forms for some kids, for other kids, the pandemic was actually felt very good in terms of certain patterns of socializing. But for a lot of kids who were really feeling the loss part, we talk about the fact that development also marches along, like independent of a pandemic or not. A lot of development happens anyway. Yes, it gets impacted, and to not lose sight of the fact that kids are developing anyway. But I mean, I guess, Julianne, I would just say that it's a big transition, and I think parents feel the losses, know the losses, and it feels harder now.
Yeah. And I think we want to, I hear you saying, Tyler, we're trying to like validate. I mean, this parent is this question, we get versions of this, of different things all the time. And I think one of the challenges that Ty and I have among many, but is, because we want to validate that worry. It's a completely understandable worry. And I hear you, Ty, I think trying to like normalize both the worry and the fact that, I hope this does not feel invalidating or minimizing, but that your child's experiences or how this transition, which you're right, Ty, is a big transition, but is going to be extra big. It will be, right? But it kind of universally across, because the last 2 years in different ways, shapes, or form has been experienced by everyone, and schools are, I think, very aware and prepared. And that whole, the development happening anyway piece that you're saying, Ty, I hear too, that I think parents worry about like missed milestones and missed opportunities. And it is true. We don't want to paint a too positive picture. And this is kind of how development goes under times of stress. You can kind of catch up, and it's going to be nonlinear. And I think the other things that come to mind, at the risk of making it sound overly simple, is whether it's your child transitioning, you're trying to help support their transition from middle to high school, or some other thing, right? This is why Ty and I spent so much time talking about the importance of making things talk aboutable. So can we make that transition talk aboutable? Can you use the 4 C's to get your kid, the calm, curious, compassionate, concerned, to talk a little bit about, maybe what are they most worried about? What are you most worried about? What are you most scared about? What do they feel most prepared for? What are they most excited about? And then you can together make a plan to navigate. That's another resilience building thing. Like, how do you anticipate what might be exciting or nerve-wracking or hard? Make a plan together with the school, and then work closely with the school in navigating that transition. So I know we know it's always more complicated, but those are just some ideas. Ty, someone put in a question: how can parents, I get, maybe this is a little bit of a 4 C's thing, but how can parents start a conversation with teens who don't want to talk about their problems or issues, which is so common, right, Ty?
Yeah.
We talk about parenting. What's that?
Yeah, this comes up a lot. And I think it's a really good question, and it has many different answers. Juliana, you want me to start and then you jump in?
Yeah, I was just thinking, anyway, silly. I was just thinking about that metaphor that you always use about like parenting a teen is like flying a plane in low visibility in a storm with like no feedback. And so you're just like trying to put all this stuff out there and getting nothing back or shut down. It's hard. I think this is a common challenge. But go ahead.
So I guess my mind is going in 2 directions. One is there's lots of, okay, so I'll be, I guess, first a little less concrete an answer. That with certain teens and certain kids, conversation can stand in for like a connection. So sometimes if conversation isn't happening, we want to get creative about thinking about different ways of connecting. So at certain phases and certain time periods, certain kids don't want to talk, and we want to think about, are there ways to connect that can happen non-verbally? And
driving like an activity, like a shared activity, or right,
parallel play with a teen. I mean, literally sitting next to each other, on phones, asking once in a while what they're doing. Like, it can look, there are lots of ways to communicate. Some of it happens verbally. A lot of it during the teen years can happen non-verbally, and not to underestimate the power of connecting non-verbally with teens. So, I mean, I don't think that's what this person meant with their question. Yeah. But I think to hold that in mind too. Yeah.
Can I just add on to that, Ty? Sorry, sure. Will you hold your second point?
Sure.
Maybe you're going to say this, but also to holding on to the idea that connection or conversation with a teen is often, not always, also may look really different. So just like it can be nonverbal, parallel play, so to speak, as Ty was saying, like a conversation for some kids, right, Ty? Like it could be 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Like that can sometimes be a really powerful conversation. So again, we don't know your situation or your kid, but sometimes I think parents maybe had a kid that used to talk and then don't talk anymore. And that can happen a lot in adolescence, or they always had a quiet kid, but like shorter points of connection still count. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
And I think it's, again, this won't apply to all kids and all teens who don't want to talk. It depends. But for certain kids and teens that don't want to talk, sometimes having a conversation that's about the not wanting to talk, that isn't actually about the quote unquote problem issue or the thing they're going through that's difficult, but having more of a conversation that's about, seems like there's something about, like, sometimes talking with me about things that are upsetting, which I totally, I'm not meaning to force it. I just want you to know I'm here. Seems like sometimes that's hard to do. And I bet there are really good reasons why that's the case. I'm just curious, is it something about talking to me? Is it something about the way I'm responding? Like, talking about the fact that it's hard to talk can be a way to go with certain teens in certain situations.
And then
yeah.
can I add on, Ty, and then we can move
Yeah.
on. But at the risk of being repetitive or confusing, because we're going to have a bunch of strategies, even before all of that, don't you think, Ty, like taking the 4 C's? Again, we don't know your specific circumstance, because there can be multiple reasons why a teenager isn't talking to you, but want to normalize it. And if you haven't, think about your own approach right now. Do you go through calm, curious, compassionate before you get to concern? Because that's a really, really common reason for shutdown. If a teen doesn't feel like you are listening, they usually won't talk to you. And so think about that and try using the first 3 C's and see if that shifts a little bit. Also being mindful of your timing. We didn't talk about that yet.
Yeah.
Right? Like being
Yep.
mindful, be strategic. There are better and worse times to start a conversation, right? And particularly with our teenagers. So pick a time where they're more likely to not be distracted, that you're not interrupting something, and lower your expectation for what the conversation might look like.
And I think on the timing front, wait, just one more thing on the timing
Yeah.
front, it's both when they're most available, but also when we're most available, right? It's a two-way thing. So you sometimes start conversations, when that aren't ideal for us either.
Yeah.
So to also pay attention to where we
That's
are.
why they're starting with the C for
Right.
the calm, right? Yeah,
Right.
no, definitely, because we don't want it to be a throwaway. I'm so fried and irritable right now. Or should we do that one, Ty, or another one?
Sure. Yeah, I also there's one in the Q&A, but we've got a lot of sort of theme and variations around. I'm fried and irritable. I'm yelling at my kids a lot. I feel like a bad parent. How bad is this? Am I hurting my kids? Juliana, don't you think we've heard that theme and variation a lot?
Yeah, we've been hearing it for 2 years plus. Well, so at the risk of belaboring the point, this is our plea to all of you. Please, 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 for a little nugget of self-compassion. So being irritable, being anxious, I think that's a big part of parenting and a big part of parenting through a pandemic, I'm sorry to say. So we need self-compassion now more than ever. The more critical we are of ourselves, the more irritable we are. We already talked earlier, but all those points about self-compassion and the internal messages and expectations. We also want to mention to parents, I think sometimes, Ty, don't you think that when parents lose their patience, yell, etc., for some parents, that can then also create more problems, because parents then feel really guilty or bad. And we also kind of want to pull that away from you too, and normalizing the irritability or the losing patience or the excessive screen hours or whatever it may be. And the wonderful thing about those moments where you maybe feel like you're not the world's best parent, which is okay, and you've argued or yelled or whatever, is you have the opportunity for repair. And you've heard Ty and I now say a few times about this idea of listening being one of the most powerful parenting interventions there is. Repair after a difficult moment or an argument is also an incredibly, incredibly powerful parenting intervention, a really powerful way to build parent-child connection and to support resilience building in our kids. And so repairing, this idea of, it's not just saying I'm sorry, but really kind of acknowledging that bad spot or the losing your temper or whatever it may have been, acknowledging it, expressing awareness of it, maybe validating your child's response to it and the impact on them, and perhaps maybe making some kind of verbal commitment or plan together about how it can go differently next time. It's like a sorry plus, but that's actually really, really powerful. And you're modeling a really powerful skill for your kids and teens too, right? So when they mess up or they're irritable or they lose their temper, it's not the end of the world. And it does not mean that they're a bad person, that there are things that they can do to make it better. And that's really powerful.
Juliana, I want to get this
yeah.
one question that's come in. Can you discuss how a parent will know when they or their child need more intervention? How does a parent know about when more support is needed? for mental health issues?
Yeah, that's the big question we get all the time, and especially for these last couple of years. So again, it's so complicated because every kid is so different. But I think first and foremost, you know your kid best. And so if you have a worry of any kind, again, we know it's not this simple. Well, first, if you have a worry, which as I said earlier, never worry alone, right? So can you get more data, so to speak, or feedback? Is it talking to your partner if you have one? Is it talking to your kid? Sometimes parents have a big worry, but then when you get information from your kid, your worry can come down or your worry goes up, but at least you get more information. Partnering with the school, you guys all have contacts at the school teacher, school counselor to get information, what they're seeing. If they share that worry, then that would obviously raise your worry a little bit more. If they say things that are reassuring, that might, bring your worry down. The fact that when a parent is even asking this question, though, not to oversimplify, but sometimes it can be helpful to just then talk to someone. Pediatricians, a lot of people don't realize, can also be really helpful in assessing whether or not you have a bigger worry. I'm assuming this is a mental health issue, or perhaps still learning issue. But pediatricians can also really help to assess. Ty, should we say something about like the storm and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I think,
add on.
Yeah, I'm just watching the time a little bit because I want to be able to end on time.
know.
But I think really what we're looking for when we're trying to gauge concern is, are we seeing a sort of interference?
Like bigger
are we
shifts,
seeing like interference with functioning in a way that feels very noticeable, impacts quality of life? There's usually distress is one thing to pay attention to, level of distress, and interference of functioning. Those are the sort of the two variables that I'm looking at. And then, so are we looking at
and duration of those things, right, Ty?
Exactly.
Because a kid could be down, but if they're able to bounce back, then it's more reassuring.
Right.
But if they're not quite bouncing back, then maybe there's a little bit higher level of worry.
Right. And just to underscore what Juliana is saying, parents know their kids best. And so you want to act on whatever it is you're feeling and noticing. And I just want to underscore that.
Yeah. But if your worry feels bigger, and again, don't carry that worry alone. Like I said, get more information, talk to someone, talk to the school, talk to your pediatrician. And if you think it's a bigger worry, if your child's in mental health treatment, of course, talk to their mental health providers. If they're not in mental health treatment and you're wondering if there's a mental health issue, and you're wondering about a mental health diagnosis or treatment, like I said, a pediatrician, and all of you, for those of you here who are coming from, most of you, I think, are coming from the Newton School District, you are also welcome to reach out to us in our clinic, because you'd be eligible to connect with us there. And so that's a resource for you as well. I do you want to do these last, is there any other last things you want to say before?
Yeah, let's do wrap up, I think.
Okay, so we know there are so many more things to answer that we could discuss, but know that our clinic is here for a resource for you with any questions at all. Know that we have different events throughout the year, and you'll hear about that. We also run our Raising Resilient Teens workshop that Ty mentioned. We also are launching a Raising Resilient Kids workshop this spring. These are offered a few times a year, but the spring workshop registration is now open. So if anyone is interested in this, you can email us at nwhresilienceproject@partners.org. And generally speaking, you can also find more information on our website, or for those on social media, you can follow us on Facebook. And if any questions at all, or if you want to connect with our clinic, please don't hesitate to contact us. I and I are really, really happy to connect with parents. We didn't say this at the beginning, but talking with parents and supporting parents is one of our most favorite things to do, and appreciate all of you coming tonight.
I just want to thank Juliana and Ty for being with us tonight, for leading us through this. I know that one of my favorite takeaways from this is to do one step better than nothing. I think that is something that's manageable. And I'm going to take that with me personally. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and for your guidance. I know that this recording will be posted on the Newton-Wellesley website. So once we have that link, we'll share it out to all of you. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful remainder of the week.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody.